Sit your ass down. Peace and quiet. Okay, so we're going to move on to our third and final presentation of the Get Ahead event, which is going to be by Pete McKeague here. I don't think Pete's a terribly familiar face to most of the group. Working at Zenitel, he's been stitched up by his mates to come and do this presentation. But I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous success. So with no more further ado, Pete McKeague on what's your official title there? How is it officially done? IP?
What have I done?
What are you?
IP, PA, and PAVA.
There we go.
That's what I'm going to talk about.
Lovely. Leave you to it.
Well, there's the idea anyway. So I'm going to be taking you through a quick look at kind of all of the types of systems, but with a particular focus, which is what I've been asked to do, on IP speakers specifically. So no longer do building systems comply of simple standalone security, paging, and life safety systems. Everything's kind of getting mashed together in the IP world. So it's encouraging this convergence of systems. And IP audio systems offer networked products that then effortlessly transfer audio and control data over your network. And then what it allows us to really do is to start enhancing other subsystems within a business, not just within the audio world. So you can start to have things like your intercom, your PA, for operational use, and then PAVA, your life safety, all working together. But on top of that, you can then also bring that into access control and surveillance systems, so more security applications. So when we're talking about IP systems, we're really talking about either, it could be a single IP speaker, it could be a cluster of nodes that are within a VA system, or it could be multiple clusters all joined together across discrete geographical locations that are all then networked together to function as one massive system. And then really, I mean, you hear a lot of the time that they're also referred to as VoIP systems. It's quite a catch-all term because VoIP could mean absolutely anything. It's just voice over IP. So it could be, an intercom system gets called a VoIP system. So does an IP speaker, and so sometimes PAVA you don't tend to hear as VoIP systems, but they are generally that way enabled. There's also then unified platforms on top of that, and I'll speak about that very briefly. So if we look at the VoIP solutions that are out there, they're networked using with control protocols for your control side of things, obviously, and to initiate calls between the different products, whether it's to a microphone or else otherwise. And then you've got your transport medium for audio itself. I'm probably preaching to the choir on some of this. I'm sure you all know a lot of it. Most manufacturers do have their own proprietary protocols. If we look at what Zenitel have, we've got PMC for the ASL PAVA brand, so PMC is one of them. For our intercoms, we've got Alphacom. Bosch have got Omnio for their PAVA, for instance. And I think, you've got Honeywell ESSA with something like Veridyne AD-PCM. So we've all got our own flavor of protocols, really. On top of that, most manufacturers then also support an open protocol. So you've got AES-70 for your control, or maybe SIP for establishing calls between products. And then AES-67 for the audio transport, G711 and G722 codecs for the actual audio content itself. Then you've obviously got semi-open or licensed protocols, things like Dante, which I'm sure you're all pretty aware of. And then those are then usually supported by a manufacturer or a number of manufacturers. And it really depends between manufacturers what's supported by everybody. There's no standard in that respect. So the benefits of IP audio solutions overall, they do offer a number over kind of analog systems. Obviously, as with any of these, audio is the actual audio performance is paramount. What it IP audio systems really do is it allows us to start effortlessly sending hundreds of channels of audio over standard Ethernet cables with that kind of perfect digital fidelity. On top of that, you get some of the interesting features like automatic voice control or automatic noise sensors, that kind of thing. And the ability to push out your EQ settings and any delay settings out to the entire network pretty much from one centralized control point. They also tend to be very scalable with the ability to combine different products. So like I said, you could have an IP speaker on its own, or you can scale up to numbers of IP speakers, or you can have a single node and go from there. So that can be, as I say, across, physically disparate buildings as well, because you're going over those different networks. Some manufacturers themselves specialize in the more PAVA side of things, and others are going to be generally like your IP speaker manufacturers are more focused on maybe the operational and security point of view. So again, how they view their system might fit into different market sectors. But either way, you can usually find something that'll work together to give you pretty massive scalability across different zones. I think as well as that, there is a question of sustainability that they answer. So firstly, we were talking a minute ago about single points of failure. To a degree, you can get rid of some of that with an IP speaker because you're not having a centralized controller, for instance. The IP speakers generally act as their own controller, kind of, and then scale in unison on top of that. You've also got some, I guess, reduction in cost of ownership by being able to get rid of specific speaker wiring. You can just use relatively cheap Cat5 cable and some audio switches. And then on top of that, I think with the more PAVA side, the larger scale systems, when we look at those, you start to get modularity within there. So you already having, for instance, amplifiers with amplifier cards in, or I think ToA as well do, you've got an amplifier with a module in that becomes plug and play. So if you take that which, that could be done within the analog plane as well, but you can then start to scale it up about the fact that it's all coming from one single control point in that respect. It's all networked together. You can just move audio wherever you need it to be. So I think on top of that, one of the really interesting points is where you start looking at these integrations. You've got these systems where you can start putting in an IP speaker over on VIF into a VMS. By reducing the kind of numbers of separate systems you've got, you can start having some quite feature-rich and quite complex building systems overall, with more single points of integration, so you're reducing that complexity. And then on top, you're also then kind of combining all those other things together to add extra context, particularly into something like a security system. So you can start adding interactivity into, take a VMS. It's normally a relatively reactive system. You see something on a camera happen, and then you do something about it, usually with a physical interaction. With adding these kind of systems in together, you can start doing that in the audio domain, so you can have a live call that goes out to a specific, you see something happening on the camera, you make a call directly to that zone, or you don't do that. If you then go the other way, where you have microphones built into those products, like IP speakers again, you can have two-way communication built in on VIF. Profile T allows that kind of thing. So you can then bring communication going the other way, where the person you've asked can then respond. So now you've started to limit physical interactions, which keep the actual security staff and the staff within the building a little bit safer by being removed from having to get out there and deal with people. If we look at them for life safety, there are, as I'm sure you all know, a number of IP-based solutions that are already on the market. The modularity that I mentioned and the interoperability tends to vary between manufacturers, but by and large, you can scale your solution as you need to, and it can stay relatively easy to maintain, regardless of which manufacturer you're using. Most manufacturers do suggest that you kind of pay particular attention to the network switch design and overall network robustness for life safety, particularly because you're dealing in a world where you're trying to keep people safe. So you do need to pay attention to network audio as part of the critical path, really. And currently, I think before we go on to IP speakers, it's quite an important point to make that one of their biggest limiting factors is that they're not currently part of an EN54 system. That refresh, I've been told, is underway. It's likely to fall into EN5433, I think, which is going to be self-powered systems, speakers even. But right now, yeah, IP speakers they're not really there. So, where do IP speakers shine? They're really intended to offer simplified, robust, and cost-effective coverage for small areas or areas where you need granular zoning. So maybe in this room, you could have a couple of IP speakers would cover just this area. You might want different content in another meeting room, but still want to be able to, from the front desk, talk directly in there for paging, for instance. So an IP speaker could be good for that. You probably wouldn't try and cover an airport an airport concourse with individual IP speakers, and we'll get onto the why in a minute. Most manufacturers offer a range of speaker types and offering varying degrees of intelligence features. I've already said about AVC. Not all manufacturers include that in their speaker ranges. But either way, generally in terms of the speakers, you've got usually a horn speaker, a cabinet speaker, and a ceiling speaker. So you've got those kind of basic covered. There are varying flexibility of call types and protocols used across different manufacturers. Being an intercom company first, Zenitel are mainly SIP-based. We've got our own flavor of SIP, our own protocol. And then we also include multicast. Other people just include multicast. Some do everything as well, so it really depends on the different manufacturers as to what call types they will establish. And then, as I say, you've got varying degrees of system scaling and configurability depending on manufacturer, from a single speaker that might just be plugged straight into a VMS system over on VIF to edge systems where one speaker it kind of acts as a mini server and it controls out other speakers up to hundreds with some manufacturers. Or it can also be added as an extension of the 100-volt line system. You can upgrade your 100-volt line speakers by pretty much ripping out the transformer and sticking a kit in. So that's one of the benefits of them. Applications and use cases, I've said, they are mostly operationally focused. So you're talking about messaging, keeping everybody informed and secure. People management is another one on there, where you're really trying to get people to where they need to be. How you do that might be through a VMS, it might be through a people management system themselves. And you start getting messages that are much more kind of pre-recorded and triggered from that other system. So it might be something like, follow COVID directions, please move to counter 7, or smoking is prohibited in this area. So then you're starting to use that application, and again, it's speakers adding context to the other system is really what it's about. And then perimeter and asset protection. I've said the word VMS a bunch of times already. That's kind of what it's all about. You've got a combination of either pre-recorded messages that can be triggered from those systems, or you can have live messages and just jumping in. I mean, it's a PA system ultimately. So the benefits of these solutions are really, it's the simplicity of them. They are relatively, in comparison with a 100-volt line system, they're easier to install and expand, usually. They do save on rack space. Every single speaker has its own built-in DSP and its control. That in turn reduces the environmental impact and kind of speaks to that sustainability side. You don't have to have a room that's chock full of racks anymore. and kind of all that environmental control that goes with it. There's no centralized DSP, as I said. It is its own endpoint, so there's no central point to fail, and one speaker falling over doesn't kill the whole system. There's granular paging, and that, like I said, it's very easy to do. And it does seem, a lot of the time, I think one of the objections we get is the idea that you're going to put out, let's say somebody does do a really big installation, and they put out hundreds of endpoints. Well, in theory, you might have to configure each of those endpoints. Most manufacturers do have tools that you pretty much, they'll self-discover on the network itself, and then from that tool you can push out all of your configuration to all of the speakers out there. So it can be very easy to do. And then you've got built-in mics on most models out there, which are a basis for self-testing and automatic volume control. And then you get some of those extra use cases like the increased situational awareness. And some do two-way communication. Not all manufacturers do. It really depends on kind of the kit they're running and what they've enabled with there. Because essentially you're putting a microphone right next to a speaker. So it's not always sensible to just keep those channels open. Not all manufacturers kind of go down that route. And then, as I said, you can update existing installations. So you can take a speaker that already exists and just basically swap it over for an IP speaker quite quickly. Or you can upgrade an existing, like a legacy PA, by just adding the kit. A lot of the time, it's all most of the IP kits need is an 8-ohm speaker, essentially. So pop the transformer off and chuck a new one on. They do have some challenges. They tend to be limited by distance. So you've usually got to be within 90 to 100 meters of your switch. And PoE limits the power of most speakers, depending on which flavor of PoE you've got, to around 10 to 15 watts is generally what you see on the market. Lots of the manufacturers, I know we are working on higher powered speakers. Obviously, that will come with needing more, PoE and PoE plus and plus plus. And if failover requirements are there, you start needing to add more things like battery backup or local power. Again, varies from manufacturer to manufacturer what's on there. Some are just PoE, some have a local 24-volt DC input, so you can do some of this stuff, but it's not necessarily that easy to get failovers in there, if I'm honest. And as I've said, they can't be used for EN54 at the minute. Hopefully that will change. It's just not accommodated within the standard. Even though in reality, I think from a kind of a product point of view and a system point of view and a use case point of view, they'd be fine for it. The technicalities of how you get to EN54, it just doesn't work at the minute. There are, of course, cybersecurity concerns. As I said, you've got multiple physically accessible endpoints, and that could be seen as high vulnerability. Can people tamper with it? Can people get in there? And as I say, there is a tipping point between whether or not an IP speaker is the most cost-effective way to do it, or whether you just stick with a 100-volt line system. For larger systems, it can just be easier to have a 100-volt line system that then is IP based, past the amplifier and the controller or the router, but it's still, not IP down to the individual speaker. I spoke about cybersecurity a moment ago. In reality, IP audio systems are no more vulnerable than any other thing out there. Everything is networked these days. And generally, most manufacturers suggest that you have a closed system for their, whether it's an intercom or PAVA or even IP speakers. There is some amount of closed network, so it's not easily accessible from those that shouldn't. On top of that, you'll get some industry recommendations. So ISO 27001, most manufacturers will keep to that and suggest that everybody has that data management plan themselves. You also have 62443 that most manufacturers are beginning to work towards. It's a relatively new standard, so it is going to take some time, but that goes really, so you've got a design layer in there of the product itself, how it is developed, and then you've got product standards as well. So like I say, most manufacturers are working towards that as a proof point towards cybersecurity. And then on top of that, a lot of manufacturers will have their own hardening guide, so it will show you how to meet like the CIS or NIS directives and things like that. So you can, that's whether it's enabling features on their products themselves or how you build your network. So overall, they are, yeah, like I say, pretty secure systems. I'll just mention this briefly. Unified, or what we call at Zenitel, unified audio platforms. These combine IP, PA, and VA solutions with intercoms and telephony. So you can then run operational messages and paging all within one conglomerated audio system. It enables anywhere-to-anywhere communication, so I can make essentially an intercom call into my PA, or I can go from my PA into a group of intercoms, making them like a mini PA zone. Obviously, it is operational. You can't do it for voice alarm. And what that then allows you to do is have a single point of integration and control, again, simplifying deployments again. You've got a single supplier as well for a lot of your audio system. So that's then you get some cost benefits. You know, you've got better buying power, I guess is the best way of putting it. You've also got more cogent support. You've gone into one manufacturer, you've got all kind of one-stop shop. But few manufacturers currently provide these solutions. I think off the top of my head, there's 2 or 3 that do a truly integrated line across all of their different products. So in summary, networked audio has clear benefits as part of the modern built environment. SIP is growing as a basic requirement for most IP audio systems, but as I say, manufacturers have their own flavors of that as well. They're generally very flexible and easy to use. VoIP for emergencies is currently limited to 100-volt PAVA systems. And then IP speakers are definitely, I really hope definitely, going to be introduced as part of EN 5433. IP audio systems can easily be implemented as part of a cybersecure system. And overall, hybrid systems, including all 3 kind of facets of audio systems, are becoming more attractive, and especially for the kind of higher profile implementations. And that's it from me. Hopefully that's been informative. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Peter. Questions? Look, Daryl, please. Start with Daryl.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
If you were to implement a PoE loudspeaker for voice alarm purposes, then presumably you're looking at 30-minute fire rating for your network cable and...
Yeah, I'd assume so. I mean, right now there's no standard for it at all yet. You know, it's all in the works. Yeah, I'd imagine that there's going to have to be some amount of fire rating for the cabling. You're going to have some amount of redundancy on the switches. There's, if not redundancy on the switches, then there's going to be requirements to make sure that it's, you know, you're not just chucking in a random router that, you know. So certainly, I mean, if we look at the ASL equipment right now, we go for a slightly more open way of doing network switches, for instance. So you've got a COTS switch that is part of our EN54 declaration. Other manufacturers do other stuff. They've got their own switches and their own built-in power supplies and things like that. And I think in that respect, it'll probably end up, there'll have to be some provision like that to work with an IP speaker, because it is essentially standalone in some respects. Anyone else?
Majid?
My question is, on these hybrid systems, is there any compliance issues, or is there going to be any compliance issues in putting voice alarm on the same network as, you know, normal PA and intercom and everything else?
Not being involved in writing the standard, I don't know, if I'm honest. But what I think at the moment is it's about the use cases. Right now, you can have, as long as it doesn't get used for emergency notifications or anything like that, then you can have the two things coexisting. So in that respect, I don't think it's going to necessarily change. I think some attention is going to need to be paid to how you define those two states of the system, I guess. Is it just is it PA or is it VA? That kind of thing. Yeah.
Andy Scott at the back.
I've evidently said something contentious because 5 hands
I think
just
it's
shot
because
up.
we're talking about standards quite a lot. I feel like Andy's...
No, that's brilliant. I'd love to hear.
I'm on the committee for
Yes.
EM54,
Oh, brilliant.
16 and 24 and 33. One of the biggest problems is the construction products regulation.
Yes.
And the fact that in 2016 a building in Ireland fell down as a result of aggregate that didn't work, didn't do what it said on the tin. Somebody sued the Commission, and since then the Commission has effectively made it impossible to update or produce new harmonised standards.
Right.
And we are 11th on the list. Fire alarm devices are 11th on the list to get it done.
So even if we do, it's going to be a while, is what you're saying?
The only thing that is happening is there is work taking place on a non-harmonised standard
Yep.
for active loudspeakers.
Yes.
But that's mainly concentrating on the phased array type,
Oh, okay.
on the phased array
Yep.
aspects.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's right to say that you can't use them because there isn't a standard covering them. The problem is demonstrating to your
Yeah.
client that you've...
How it fits in.
And I would say that the answer to Majid's question is, you can do what you like with the VA system as long as it's still a VA system.
At the end of the day, yeah.
In other words, you can put a PA or a music system onto a VA, but not the other way around.
No, absolutely. And that's certainly the way we see it at the minute, yeah. I think within some industries, some market segments, industry being one, a lot of the time EN54 isn't applied. I'm not going to say doesn't apply, but isn't applied. So in that respect, you start seeing, and I'm maybe speaking outside of the UK as well, across a lot of Europe, we see a lot more of those hybrid implementations where we've got something like an intercom server that's got a bunch of either networked amplifiers off of it or IP speakers. And that's taken some life safety elements in there, but they're kind of grouping it in as operational PA because of what where they kind of delineate between what is... They don't use voice alarm generally, for one thing. It's tones or radio or some beacon or something else. So there's a lot of the times where you've got a system where they want to add life safety messaging in, but it doesn't fall under EN54. So it really depends on also like what the actual customer wants out of their built environment as well.
Paul, sorry. Bumped Andy.
Thank you. It was actually going back to Darryl's point, and it's quite minor in comparison to some of the other things we've talked about since, but with the IP speakers and the PoE, as I understand it, the maximum sort of cable length you can run on that is, what, a couple of 100 metres before you have to put another...
It's 100 metres. Yeah, 90 to 100 metres.
90 to 100 metres. So it suggests that you're going to have a lot of PoE switches in the field as part of the critical application.
Absolutely.
Which they're obviously going to need power supply, dual power supply to them, and they're going to need monitoring and so forth. And that sort of, I mean, I know we have distributed PA systems, but it's slightly different to having lots of small...
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I say, for VA, that is going to be one of the biggest challenges, how you get that redundancy and how we do that in practical sense.
Power? That switch?
Well, no, modern building has ITC switches that deliver the Cat6 cable around the building anyway.
With the PoE part?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, the PoE and the 100 metres thing are two different...
Okay.
Yeah. The limitation's more on data fidelity at the, data rates for audio.
Throw a little use case in here. So,
Please.
I've actually used a bunch of PoE
Oh, cool.
loudspeakers on site. Not as part, we're not VA, it's just part of the PA system. But what we've been able to do really well is a meeting room that is on the same PA circuit as the corridor, as the toilet.
Yep.
We've been able to make that space into a video conferencing space utilising the installed infrastructure in there to add these speakers, create a little zone and do that. So being able to kind of evolve the space has worked really well.
Yeah, and that's what they're great for, I think, as well. Things like we see a lot of use cases on, and we've got projects out there that are on things like metro stations now. Normally, it doesn't necessarily, again, EN54 is not applying, but you've got a small remote station in the middle of nowhere where you can't just chuck a load of equipment cabinets in. You have to do something, and it's a lot easier to find a good way to hide a switch, a small switch, and hang a couple of IP speakers off of it rather than trying to get an amplifier and an equipment cabinet and all the cooling there in the middle of what is essentially a field. That they're really good for that kind of thing.
Darryl again? Well, just for we'll come to you in a second, Brian. Just for the ease of passing the microphone around, Darryl had the upper hand.
Yeah, I think that comment about being able to use, say, for a meeting room, has, also sustainability credentials associated with it. Obviously, having a video conferencing loudspeaker combined with a public address loudspeaker, not having to use two pieces of kit.
Absolutely.
Doubling up cables and stuff. But that whole active loudspeaker thing, I mean, obviously, we've got, you just walk around here, half a dozen rail stations that use active loudspeakers as part of their voice alarm system. But, there's loudspeakers like HoloPlot, which have, the ability to throw sound very little losses, which may be attractive to use in a voice alarm situation. Again, pretty new, unproven technology, et cetera, But there really does need to be work in terms of acceptability for active loudspeakers in voice alarm situations. It's more a statement.
And I agree with it, but I'm a manufacturer, I would.
I think it'd be nice to think that the struggle for acceptability was actually going on, that we were trying to raise and encourage thought, development, practical implementation of new technologies and that side of things to actually, as an industry, rather than try and skim along the bottom of minimum compliance. It's a much more interesting part of the environment for us to all be working in terms of moving this technology on, and it's definitely going to come. There's no question.
I think you're right. I mean, 7827 says where you need high power, high directivity loudspeakers, you don't need to be EN54. And I think that what you want to be is satisfy yourself you've got a very safe, redundant, robust solution that won't fall over when you need it.
Yeah. Well, I think the V5 opportunity to risk assess your solution is there if you're feeling keen. So, can we go back to Brian at the back there?
As a retired audio and acoustics engineer, can you explain what the IP kit consists of for the 100-volt ring?
When I talk about an IP kit, I can talk about the products I make. I don't know the ins and outs of everybody, but generally they're the same. It's essentially, effectively an IP intercom kit. So what you have is you've got a small box of magic, or it's not magic. You've got your electronics kit in there that will usually enable, so you'll have the SIP communication over there. It's usually got a line out for a speaker because it's designed to build an intercom. And then you've usually got a microphone input, some contacts in there, usually a relay, certainly within hours. And then what other manufacturers do depends on, I guess, what they want to do with their price point, what they're really trying to offer. Some of the other manufacturers is literally just a box with an RJ45 on it and like a line out. So it really depends on what each of the manufacturers sees for the added value and things like that. And obviously you've got a wide range of price points for these products as well. If you just want it to go IPOE to noise, then you've got a product that does that. If you want more complex features like AVC and things like that, they're going to be at the other end of the scale.
Okay, any more questions? Majid?
Do you have any commissioning tools for these IP speakers? Because I can imagine once you go past about half a dozen, it's
No, I must admit, there's no manufacturers that I can think of that have commissioning tools. There's a few that have the kind of simple design tool thing, you know, X area means X speakers. But no, I don't think there is many of the actual commissioning tools.
Do you see what I'm getting at? If you've
yeah.
got a number of speakers, where are they all? How do you know where they are?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that, I guess, there are some within the intercom. It's essentially, for us, we've got an intercom configuration tool that is the same for the IP speakers. So that you'll see individual IP addresses and MAC addresses. How you then map that into the physical world is kind of on the designer, and would normally recommend that they have that there as they install. But it can be, yeah, it's a perfectly valid point, because it can be really difficult to see, especially if you've got your MAC address or your IP address written on the back of the speaker that's now in the ceiling. It can be quite a challenge. So yeah, it is definitely worth us thinking about. Thank you.
John.
Just a comment, really. That's right. Can't you put LEDs on them so that you can just press a button to say identify, and in that zone, then that LED flashes on that speaker? So
You could do, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I don't think anyone really does at the minute. Oh, they do. The Access ones do. Ah, cool.
I mean, we do IP ceiling speakers for boardrooms.
Oh, right, cool.
And, we have two types of inputs. One can be a program input, one can be an intercom input.
Right.
And, we have a flashing LED on it so that you can
Just see whether it works on that. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
press a button and the LED on it.
There you go. So yes, you can. We just don't. Yeah.
Okay, so I think in keeping with 2:15 finish, we're coming towards the end. Any round of applause again for Peter? So I have my long speech here that's handed to me by Rod. No, list of people I need to thank. Obviously, first of all, our presenters, Peter, Russell, Andrew, other Peter, Andy, Tony, if I gather he's gone. Very big thanks to Daryl at Barrow Happold for hosting us here today. A fabulous venue, much appreciated. Round of applause for Daryl, please.
Very welcome to be here.
Thank you very much. Our AV team, Dan Fantarini, putting together everything else. Okay, I can't read that one, Roz.
Jordan. Oh,
No, before Jordan. Technology Solutions, yes. Scrawly handwriting. Thank you very much. Thank you. And our live streaming operator, Jordan Ashley, BSB Sound. And of course, can we just add Roz to the list for putting in a lot of effort putting all this together. I actually got a text message from someone who didn't come today, and he said, "Oh, I saw your LinkedIn post this morning. I really have liked to have come to that, but I didn't know about it," which I sometimes find sort of like slightly mind-boggling. And I think we try really hard to encourage people to come. So I think the key feature is next time we do one of these, please spread the word as far as possible and encourage people to come, because it's nothing worse than thinking that you've put all this together and still somebody who might have wanted to come wasn't able to come because they didn't know about it. So thank you very, very much for everybody who's attended. Thanks for those who've made the effort. Thanks to attend in person, because coming to London is a challenge. Thanks equally for everybody who's, enjoying it from home or their office. Thank you very much for your perseverance in staying with us today. And with that, we're going to move on to having some lunch, which unfortunately we can't share with you guys who are not here, but I'm sure you've got your own arrangements. So thanks very much.